Chapter 45. Julie glanced at me, as if asking tacitly whether this didn't prove that we must ultimately be in safe hands. I didn't dispute it, and not only because I could see she didn't want me to. I half expected to hear a voice calling in Norwegian from Motsa, or to see some brilliantly contrived pillar of fire rise out of the trees. But there was a long silence, only the crickets cheeping. You never went back there? Sometimes to return is a vulgarity. But you must have been curious to know how it all ended. Not at all. Perhaps one day, Nicholas, you will have an experience that means a great deal to you. I could hear no irony in his voice, but it was implicit. You will then realize what I mean when I say that some experiences so possess you that the one thing you cannot tolerate is the thought of their not being in some way forever present. Saidavar is a place I do not want time to touch, so I am not interested in what it is now, or what they are now, if they still are. Julie spoke. But you said you would write to Gustav? So I did. He wrote to me. He wrote for 2 years with regularity, at least once a season. But he never referred to what interests you, except to say that the situation was unchanged. His letters were full of ornithological notes. They became very dull reading because I had lost most of my interest in the classifying aspects of natural history. Our letters became very infrequent. I think I had a Christmas card from him in 1926 or 1927. Since then, no sound. He is dead now. Henrik is dead. Ragna is dead. What happened to you when you got back to France? I saw Henrik meet his pillar of fire at about midnight on August 17th, 1922. The fire at Givray-le-Duc began at the same hour of the same night. Julie was more nakedly incredulous than I was. He sat turned away, and our eyes met. She lowered hers with a little grimace, like someone disappointed. I said, "You're not suggesting." "I'm suggesting nothing. There was no connection between the events. No connection is possible, or rather, I am the connection. I am whatever meaning the coincidence has." There was an unusual shade of vanity in his voice, as if in fact he believed he had in some way precipitated both events, and their common timing. I sensed that the coincidence was not literally true, but something he had invented, which held another, metaphorical meaning, that the two episodes were linked in significance, that we were to use both to interpret him, just as the story of Deducan had thrown light on Conchis himself. This threw light on the hypnosis, that image he had used, reality breaking through the thin net of science. I had myself recalled something too similar from the hypnosis for it to be coincidence. Everywhere in the mask, these interrelationships, threads between circumstance. He turned parentally to Julie. "My dear, I think it is your bedtime." I glanced at my watch. It was just after 11. Julie gave a little shrug, as if the question of bedtime was unimportant. She said, "Why have you told us this, Maurice? All that is past possesses our present. Saidavar possesses Borani. Whatever happens here now, whatever governs what happens, is essentially what happened 30 years ago in that Norwegian forest." He spoke to her then as he often spoke to me, the pretense that Julie was basically any different, any more understanding of what was going on, was wearing very thin. I knew he was initiating another shift in our relationships, or the conventions that ruled them. In some way, we were both cast now as his students, his disciples. I remembered that favorite Victorian picture of the bearded Elizabethan seaman pointing to sea and telling a story to two goggle-eyed little boys. Another surreptitious look passed between Julie and myself. It was clear to both of us that we were moving into new territory. Then I felt her foot, a fleeting touch like a snatched kiss. Well, I suppose I must go. The mask of formality was resumed. We all stood. Maurice, that was so remarkable and interesting. She moved and kissed him briefly on the cheek. Then she offered me her hand, one shadow of conspiracy in her eyes, one minute extra pressure of her fingers. She turned to go, stopped. I'm sorry, I forgot to replace your matches. It doesn't matter. Conscious and I sat again in silence. A few moments later I heard light footsteps going across the gravel toward the sea. I smiled across the table at his unrevealing face. The pupils of his eyes seemed black in their clear whites, a mask that watched me. No illustrations in the text tonight? Does it need them? No, you told it very well. He shrugged dismissively, then waved his arm briefly round to at house, at trees, at sea. This is the illustration. Things as they are, in my small domain. At any point before that day, I should have argued with him. His not-so-small domain held a lot more mystification than mysticism, and the one sure feature of things there was that they were not what they seemed. He might have his profound side, but another was that of a cunning old charlatan. I said lightly, Your patient seemed much more normal this evening. She may appear more normal tomorrow. You must not let that deceive you. There's no chance of that. As I told you, I shall keep myself out of sight tomorrow, but if we do not see each other again, I shall see you next weekend. I'll be here. Good. Well. He stood up, as if he had really only been waiting for a certain time. I presumed the time for Julie to disappear, to pass. As I stood as well, I said, Thank you, once again, for possessing me. He inclined his head like some seasoned impresario, too accustomed to first-night compliments to take them very seriously. We walked indoors. The two Bonars glowed gently from the inner wall of his bedroom. On the landing outside, I came to a decision. I think I'll go for a stroll, Mr. Conchis. I don't feel very sleepy. Just down to Mozza. I knew he might say he would come with me and so make it impossible to be at the statue at midnight, but it was a counter-trap for him and insurance for me. If we were caught, I could claim the assignation was an accident. At least I hadn't concealed that I was going out. As you wish. He put out his hand and clasped mine, then watched me for a moment as I went downstairs. But before I reached the bottom, I heard his door close. He might have been out on the terrace listening, so I crunched noisily on the gravel as I walked north toward the track out of Barani. But at the gate, instead of turning down to Mozza, I went on up the hill for 50 yards or so and sat down against a tree trunk from where I could watch the entrance and the track. It was a dark night, no moon, but the stars diffused a very faint luminescence over everything, a light like the softest sound, touch of fur on ebony. My heart was beating faster than it should. It was partly at the thought of meeting Julie, partly at something far more mysterious, the sense that I was now deep in the strangest maze in Europe. Now I really was Theseus. Somewhere in the darkness Ariadne waited, and perhaps the Minotaur. I sat there for a quarter of an hour, smoking but shielding the red tip from view, ears alert and eyes alert. Nobody came and nobody went. At 5 to 12, I slipped back through the gate and struck off eastward through the trees to the gully. I moved slowly, stopping frequently. I reached the gully, waited, then crossed it, and walked as silently as I could up the path to the clearing with the statue. It came, majestic shadow, into sight. The seat under the almond tree was deserted. I stood in the starlight at the edge of the clearing, very tense, certain that something was about to happen, straining to see if there was anyone in the dense black background. I had an idea it might be a man with blue eyes and an axe. There was a loud ching. Someone had thrown a stone and hit the statue. I stepped into the darkness of the pine trees beside me. Then I saw a movement, and an instant later another stone, a pebble, rolled across the ground in front of me. The movement showed a gleam of white, and it came from behind a tree on my side of the clearing, higher up. I knew it was Julie. I ran up the steep slope, stumbled once, then stood. She was standing beside the tree in the thickest shadow. I could see her white shirt and trousers, her blonde hair, and she reached forward with both hands. In 4 long strides I got to her, and her arms went round me, and we were kissing, one long, wild kiss that lasted with 1 or 2 gulps for air, for a fevered readjustment of the embrace, and lasted. In that time I thought I finally knew her. She had abandoned all pretense. She was passionate, almost hungry. She let me crush her body, met mine. I murmured 1 or 2 torn endearments, but she stopped my mouth. I turned to kiss her hand, caught it, and brushed my lips down its side and round the wrist to the scar on the back. A second later I had let go of her and was reaching in my pocket for the matches. I struck one and lifted her left hand. It was scarless. I raised the match. The eyes, the mouth, the shape of the chin, everything about her was like Julie, but she was not Julie. There were little puckers at the corner of her mouth, a slight over-alertness in the look, a sort of calculated impudence. Above all, there was a deep suntan. She sustained my stare, then looked down, then up again, under her eyelashes. Damn. I flicked the match away and struck another. She promptly blew it out. Nicholas. A low, reproachful, and strange voice. There must be some mistake. Nicholas is my twin brother. I thought midnight would never come. Where is she? I spoke angrily, and I was angry, but not quite as much as I sounded. It was so neat a modulation into the world of Beaumarchais, of restoration comedy, and I knew the height the dupe has fallen is measured by his anger. She? You forgot your scar. How clever of you to see it was makeup before. And your voice. It's the night air, she coughed. I caught hold of her hand and pulled her over to the seat under the almond tree. Now, where is she? She couldn't come. And don't be so rough. Well, where is she? The girl was silent. I said, that wasn't funny. I thought it was rather exciting. She sat, then glanced up at me, and so did you. For Christ's sake, I thought you... But I didn't bother to finish the sentence. You're June? Yes, if you're Nicholas. I sat down beside her and fished out a packet of Papastratos. She took one, and I gave her a good long look in the match flare. In return, she examined me with eyes markedly less frivolous than her voice till then. The striking facial similarity with her sister upset me in some unexpected way. It seemed a hitherto unrealized aspect of Julie that I could do without, an unnecessary complication. Perhaps it was the tan on this other girl's skin, a general air of living a more outdoor physical life, of being healthier, a fraction more rounded in the cheeks, indeed of being what Julie herself must look like in normal circumstances. I leaned forward, elbows on knees. Why didn't she come herself? I thought Maurice had told you why. I didn't show it, but I felt like an overconfident chess player who suddenly sees that his supposedly impregnable queen is only one move from extinction. Once again I thought frantically back. Perhaps the old man had been right about the high intelligence of some schizophrenics. The tea-throwing scene had seemed too far out of character if she was cunning mad, but cunning madder still might have precipitated it just to plant the wink at the end. Then those collusive bare feet under the table, the message with the matches. Perhaps he had been less oblivious than he had seemed. We don't blame you. Julie's misled far greater experts than you. Why are you so sure I'm misled? Because you wouldn't have kissed someone you really thought was mentally unbalanced like that. She added, At least I hope you wouldn't. I said nothing. Honestly, we're not blaming you. I know how clever she is at suggesting that the madness is in everyone around her, the damsel in distress line. But there was something faintly interrogative behind her tone of voice in that last little phrase, as if she wasn't quite certain how I would react, how far I could be pushed. She's certainly cleverer at that than the line you're taking. She was silent a long moment. You don't believe me? You know I don't believe you, and I think your sister's mean to still doubt me. She left a longer silence still. We couldn't both get away together. She added in a lower voice, I wanted to be sure, too. Sure of what? That you are what you claim. I've told her the truth. As she keeps claiming, with a little too much enthusiasm to make me feel she's in a fit state to judge, she added dryly, which I now begin to understand, at least physically. You can easily check that I work at a school on the other side of the island. We know there's a school. I don't suppose you have any means of identification on you. This is ridiculous. Not so ridiculous in present circumstances as my not asking. I had to grant some justice to that. I haven't got my passport, a Greek permis de séjour, if that's any good. May I see it, please? I fished in my back pocket, then struck 3 or 4 matches while she examined the permis. It gave my name, address, and profession. She handed it back. Satisfied? Her voice was serious. You swear you're not working for him? Only in the sense you know that I've been told Julie is undergoing some kind of experimental cure for schizophrenia, which I've never believed or never face-to-face with her. You've never met Maurice before you came here a month ago? Categorically not. Or signed a contract of any sort with him? I looked at her. Meaning you have? Yes, but not for what's happening. She hesitated. Julie will tell you tomorrow. I wouldn't mind seeing some documentary evidence either. All right, that's fair enough. She dropped her cigarette and screwed it out. Her next question came out of the blue. Are there any police on the island? A sergeant? 2 men? Why do you ask? I just wondered. I drew a breath. Let me get this straight. First of all, you were ghosts. Then you were schizophrenics. Now you're next week's consignment to the Seraglio? Sometimes I almost wish we were. It would be simpler. She said quickly, Nicholas, I'm notorious for never taking anything very seriously, and that's partly why we're here. And even now it's fun in a way, but we really are just 2 English girls who got themselves into such deep waters these last 2 months that... She broke off, and there was a silence between us. Do you share Julie's fascination for Maurice? She didn't answer for a moment, and I looked at her. She had a wry smile. I have a suspicion that you and I are going to understand each other. You don't share it? She looked down. She's academically much brighter than I am, but I do have a sort of basic common sense she lacks. I smell a rat if I don't understand what's going on. Julie tends to be all starry-eyed about it. Why did you bring up the police? Because we're prisoners here, or very subtle prisoners. No expense spared. There aren't any bars. I gather she's told you we're constantly being assured we can go home whenever we like. except that somehow we're always being shepherded and watched. Are we safe at the moment? I hope so, but I must go soon. I can easily get the police, if you want. That's a relief. And what's your theory about what's going on? She gave me a rueful smile. I was going to ask you that. I accept he has been genuinely connected with psychiatry. He questions Julie for hours after you've been here. What you said, how you behaved, what lies she told you, all the rest of it. It's as if he gets some vicarious thrill from knowing every detail. And he does hypnotize her? He's done us both, me only once. That extraordinary. You had it? Yes. And Julie several times, to help her learn her parts, all the facts about the Lily thing. Then a whole session on how a schizophrenic would behave. Does he question her while she's under? To be fair, no. He's always scrupulous about whichever one of us isn't being hypnotized being present. I've always been there listening. But you have doubts? She hesitated again. There's something that worries us, a sort of voyeuristic side, the feeling we have that he's watching you two falling for each other. She looked at me. Has Julie told you about 3 Hearts? She must have seen by my face that the answer was no. I'd rather she told you. Tomorrow. What 3 Hearts? The original idea wasn't that I should always stay in the background. And? I'd rather she told you. I made a guess. You and me? She hesitated. It has been dropped now because of what's happened, but we suspect it was always meant to be dropped, which leaves me wondering why I'm here at all. But it's vile. We're not just pawns on a chessboard. And he knows full well, Nicholas, it's not just that he wants to be mysterious to us. He wants us to be mysterious to him. She smiled and murmured, Anyway, speaking for myself, I'm not sure I don't wish it hadn't been dropped. Can I tell your sister that? She grinned and looked down. You mustn't take me too seriously. I've already begun to realize that. She let a little silence pass. Julie's only just got over a particularly messy affair, Nicholas. That's one reason she wanted to be out of England. She has my sympathies. So I understand. What I'm trying to say is that I don't want to see her hurt again. She won't be hurt by me. She leaned forward. She has a kind of genius for picking the wrong men. I don't know you, so that's not meant personally at all. Simply that her past record doesn't give me much confidence. She said, I'm being overprotective. She doesn't need protecting from me. I just mean that she's always looking for poetry and passion and sensitivity, the whole romantic kitchen. I live on a rather simpler diet. Prose and pudding? I don't expect attractive men necessarily to have attractive souls. She said it with a dryness tinged with wistfulness that I liked. I looked secretly at her profiled face and had a glimpse of a world where they did both play the same part, where I had both, the dark and the pale. Renaissance body stories about girls who changed places in the night. I saw a future where, all right, of course, I married Julie, but this equally attractive and evidently rather different sister-in-law accompanied, if only aesthetically, the marriage. With twins, there must always be nuances, suggestions, blendings of identity, souls and bodies that become indistinguishable and reciprocally haunting. She murmured, I must go now. Have I convinced you? As much as you can. Can't I walk back with you to wherever you hide? You can't come in. All right, but I need reassurance too. She hesitated. If you'll promise to turn back when I say. Agreed. We stood up and went down toward the statue of Poseidon in the starlight. We had hardly reached it when we saw we hadn't been alone. We both froze. A white figure had stood out some 20 yards away from among the bushes at the bottom, seaward side of the clearing round the statue. We had spoken in voices too low to be overheard, but it was still a shock. June whispered, "Oh, God damn, who is it?" She caught my hand and made me turn away. "It's our beloved watchdog. Don't do anything. I'll have to leave you here." I looked over my shoulder and made him out better. A man in a white medical coat, a would-be male nurse with some kind of dark mask over his face, whose features I couldn't distinguish. June pressed my hand and sought my eyes, a look as direct as her sister's. "I do trust you. Please trust us." "What's going to happen now?" "I don't know. But don't start arguing. Just go back to the house." She leaned quickly forward, pulling me a little toward her, and kissed my cheek. Then she was walking down toward the white coat. When she was near the man, I followed her. He stood silently aside to let her pass into the deeper darkness between the trees, but then blocked the opening between the bushes again. With a shock almost greater than seeing him in the first place, I suddenly realized as I came down to him that he wasn't wearing a mask. He was a Negro, a big, tall man, perhaps 5 years older than myself. He stared at me without expression. I came to within some 10 feet of him. He extended his arms, warning, forbidding the way. I could see he was lighter skinned than some black men, a smooth face, intent eyes, somehow liquid and animal, concentrated purely on the physical problem of my next move. He stood poised, yet coiled, like an athlete, a boxer. I stopped and said, "You look prettier with your jackal mask on." He did not move, but June's face reappeared behind him. It was anxious, beseeching. "Nicholas, go back to the house, please." I looked from her concerned eyes to his. She said, "He can't speak. He's a mute." I thought black eunuchs went out with the Ottoman Empire. His expression did not change a millimeter, and I had the impression that he hadn't even understood my words. But after a moment he folded his arms and widened his stance. I could see a black polo-neck jumper under the medical coat. I knew he wanted me to come at him, and I was tempted to take him on. I let June decide. I looked past him at her. "Will you be all right?" "Yes, please go." "I'll wait by the statue." She nodded and turned away. I went back to the sea god and sat on the rock he stood on. For some reason, I don't know why, reached out a hand and grasped his bronze ankle. The Negro stood with folded arms like a bored attendant in a museum, or perhaps indeed like some scimitarred janissary at the gates of the imperial harem. I relinquished the ankle and lit a cigarette to counter the released adrenaline. A minute passed, 2. I listened, despite the sisters' talk of a hiding place for a boat engine, but there was silence. I felt, beyond the insult to my virility before an attractive girl, ill at ease and guilty. The news of the clandestine meeting would obviously go straight back to Conchis now. Perhaps he would appear. It wasn't so much that I was frightened of having a showdown over the schizophrenia nonsense, but that having broken his rules so signally, I would be sent off the field for good. I contemplated trying to suborn the Negro in some way, argue with him, plead, but he simply waited in the shadows, a doubly, both racially and personally, anonymous face. From somewhere down by the sea there was a whistle. Things happened very fast then. The white figure strode swiftly up toward me. I stood and said, "Now wait a minute." But he was strong and quick as a leopard, 2 inches taller than I am, an obviously humorless face, and an angry one. It was no good. I was frightened. There was something extremely violent about his eyes, and it flashed through my mind that he was a black surrogate of Henrik Nygaard. Without warning, he spat full in my face and then palm-pushed me sharply back onto the rock pedestal of the statue. The edge caught the back of my knees, and I had to sit. As I wiped the spittle off my nose and cheek, I saw him already walking away down the slope. I opened my mouth to shout something after him, then swallowed it. I pulled out a handkerchief, kept wiping my face. It was filthy, defiled. I would have murdered Conchis if he had stood in front of me then. But in fact, I went back to the gate and down the path to Moza. I had to be outside the domain. There I stripped off my clothes and plunged into the sea, rubbed my face in the salt water, then swam 100 yards out. The sea was alive with phosphorescent diatoms that swirled in long trails from my hands and feet. I dived and seal turned on my back and looked up through the water at the blurred white specks of the stars. The sea cooled, calmed, silked round my genitals. I felt safe out there and sane, out of their reach, all their reaches. I had long suspected there was some hidden significance in the story of Deducan and his gallery of automata. What Conchis had done, or was trying to do, was to turn Borani into such a gallery, and real human beings into his puppets, and I was not going to stand much more of it. June had impressed me, her common sense view of the situation. I was clearly the only male around that they could trust, and quite apart from anything else, they needed my help, my strength. I knew it would be no good storming into the house and having it out with the old man. He would only feed me more lies. He was like some animal in a den. He had to be coaxed out a little more before he could be trapped and destroyed. I slowly trod water, with the dark slope of Borani across the silent water to the east. And gradually I quietened down. It might have been worse than just that spit, and I had insulted the man. I possessed a lot of faults, but racialism wasn't one of them. Or at least, I like to think racialism wasn't one of them. Besides, the ball was now firmly in the old man's court. However he reacted, I would discover something about him. I must wait to see what change this brought to tomorrow's script. There returned that old excitement. Let it all come, even the black minotaur, so long as it came, so long as I might reach the center and have the final prize I coveted. I went ashore and dried myself with my shirt. Then I pulled on the rest of my clothes and walked back to the house. It was silent. I listened without bothering to conceal it from anyone who might have been listening in return outside Conscious's bedroom door. There was no sound.